Hello everyone, and welcome to this bobsguide webinar. My name is Ian Fendick, and I'm the Training and Events Manager at bobsguide. Today's webinar is called Cloud Mobility and ECM, Key Considerations for Financial Services. And we're very happy to be running this webinar with our sponsors, Alfresco. Speaking for us today, we have David Jones, who is a market analyst at the Association for Information and Image Management, and Paul Hampton, who is a product marketing director at Alfresco. Just before I hand you over to our speakers today, there are a couple of quick housekeeping points. If you have a question to ask our speakers, then please type it into the box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We'll try to use these questions at the end of the session, time permitting. Please can you make sure you send all your questions to all panelists. And finally, the entire webinar is being recorded. So if you miss anything, or think a colleague will be interested, you'll be sent a link to access the recording in the next few days. So now I'd like to hand you over to our first speaker today, David Jones. David, over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Ian, very much for the introduction. So today we're going to be looking at the concept of the compliance conundrum, and really how organisations of all types are struggling with the need to remain compliant, while at the same time having their staff shouting and screaming at them to provide things like mobile access, cloud storage, and external collaboration. Now, although this topic is relevant to all business types, today we're specifically going to be focusing on financial services organisations. And it's my job today really to set the scene, if you like, to describe the issues that these organisations are facing on a daily basis. And then, as Ian described, I'll be handing over to Paul Hampton from Alfresco, who will take us through some of the ways in which organisations can start solving this conundrum. I should also at this point mention that everything that we're talking about today can be found in an upcoming report by AIM and Alfresco entitled The Compliance Conundrum, which will be released later on in the month, and details of which will come a little bit later on in the presentation. So just before I start, for those of you who don't know who AIM are, AIM were founded as an industry association in 1943, and today we provide support to a global community of around about 97,000 information professionals. We provide best practice guidance on all things information management by way of training, publications, research, and online activities such as forums and blogs. The forthcoming Compliance Conundrum white paper that I mentioned is typical of the sort of ways in which we provide relevant, freely downloadable content to our community. Okay, so enough about that. Let's start looking at this conundrum. Now, as I said earlier, we're focusing today on financial services as a vertical. So from their point of view, what are we looking at here? Well, in a nutshell, organisations in this sector are lagging behind similar businesses from other vertical markets. I'll explain exactly what they're missing in a moment, but for now let's focus on this tortoise and hare style situation that's occurring. Now, these financial services organisations don't have bad staff, they don't have a lack of funds for IT, and they certainly don't lack the desire to make IT work for them, yet they're still being left behind. Why? Well, for me, there are two ways to look at this. First, there are the specific reasons behind the problem. Then there are the underlying business sentiments. Now, the reasons behind the problem itself are heavily based around strict regulations. With the exception of healthcare, financial services is probably the most regulated vertical market. And with those regulations come some very harsh penalties for getting it wrong. For example, in 2010, a Bank of America employee leaked customer information to an identity theft ring at an estimated cost to the bank of $10 million. In 2011, Citibank servers were compromised by hackers who gained access to almost 500,000 customer details at an estimated cost of $2.7 million. And both of those instances were before the fines were actually imposed by the regulators, which bumped the cost of those up a lot more. So all in all, it's not really surprising that those in charge of IT within these organisations are possibly what you might call a little bit insular. They've got a sort of let's lock down what we've got and make sure that it's safe style of attitude. And that's also visible when you look at the underlying business sentiments that I alluded to earlier. The businesses here are essentially looking to minimise risk and looking to make their information as secure as possible. And both of those are perfectly understandable sentiments. But purely focusing on those, the organization's missing some potentially huge benefits. And this is where the conundrum really starts to bite. So what are these organizations missing? Well, first up is collaboration. Now, collaboration means a lot of things to a lot of people. Put simply, it can be the ability to jointly edit a document with other users. But it can also be described to use more, or used to describe more complex workflows where multiple users interact with one or more processes at various points. Now, don't get me wrong at all. All of these can and are being achieved within financial services organizations today. But the real benefit comes when you can perform this type of collaboration outside of the organization. Being able to collaborate with other organizations, contractors, and even customers just adds a whole new dimension to an organization's ability to work effectively. And this cannot be done within the restrictive IT environments faced by some financial services users. Secondly, let's talk about mobile devices. I'd hazard a guess that every single one of you listening today owns at least one smartphone or tablet device, maybe even more. But not just that, you actually fully expect to be able to interact with your organization using these devices. Well, it's really a no-brainer, isn't it? But while many of you might be able to view content from your systems, you can't really do anything else with it, can you? And that's because it's not actually that straightforward to do this from within the IT department. And indeed, only 11% of organizations provide any sort of mobile-optimized browser interface to their systems, and only 10% have got dedicated mobile apps. But again, the benefits of getting mobile-optimized communications with business information and processes are substantial, which leads me on to my next point. It's what I'm calling the biggie, and it really comes down to this. Organizations are working differently now to how they used to. Fact. Terms like collaboration and remote working were nowhere near as prevalent in the workplace 10 years ago as they are today. Now combine this with the figures that you're seeing on the screen now regarding the amount of time spent by staff outside of the corporate four walls, and you start to see why the idea of having an organization's information all locked up within those four walls, it's just a situation that simply cannot continue. So we've got the conundrum in full swing now, essentially. We've got organizations who want to secure their information. They want to keep it safe. They want to keep it compliant. But they also want workers to be as effective as possible, especially when they're outside of the office. So what can they do? Well, one solution is for users themselves to bypass these systems. And one way to do large parts of what we discussed is via so-called cloud file shares. Now, I'd like to take a few seconds just to put up a quick poll so that I can get some feedback from yourselves as to how you're actually seeing this in your own organizations. You'll see on the right-hand side of your screen a polling section. If you could tick down there any one of those items that you or anyone within your organization have used to get around the restrictions put in place by you and your IT systems. Now, we'll leave this open for a few seconds and just start seeing some responses coming back here. I should say at this stage that I actually do use at least 3 of those devices to get around the restrictions put in place in my own personal IT, but I'm probably not typical in this situation. So we'll just wait a few more seconds to let a few more responses come in. And while we're waiting for the responses, here we go. I'm sure you can all see those responses now. Interestingly, 62% are using Dropbox to get around restrictive IT systems. A lot of people are using Google Drive, Evernote, SkyDrive, all the traditional ones. Well, research done by AIM late last year showed similar results. At the time, we saw that 30% were actually seeing increased use of unofficial content management systems and cloud file shares. Only 5% at that time had an official cloud-based system. We're seeing 8% today, so that's a little bit of an increase. So what's the whole point of this? Well, it shows that if the organization does nothing, then the users will actually go and do it themselves. And unfortunately, by making their lives easier, the users are actually creating huge problems. Not only are they exposing corporate information to systems typically with less than enterprise level security, but in the process they may well be rendering the corporate compliance regimes totally invalid. And because all of this is basically because the organization couldn't provide the right level of basic facilities. So what can organizations do? Well, in my opinion, there's a relatively simple to describe solution to all of this. Organizations really need not to see these areas of security and compliance, collaboration, mobile and remote working as conflicting issues to be pitched against each other. More so, they need to work towards figuring out how to get the balance right between access to information and locking it down. So a very simple solution to describe in words, but how can organizations actually do this in practice? Well, to answer that question, I'd like to hand over to Paul from Alfresco.
Thank you, David. So, welcome everybody online. My name is Paul Hampton, Director of Product Marketing at Alfresco. And I'm going to take the themes that David has exposed and look at this and say, well, how can a hybrid approach to technology help companies address many of the concerns, many of the issues that David has outlined. And I'm going to talk specifically about hybrid ECM. Alfresco is an enterprise content management solution that allows companies to manage a whole range of different documents, files, videos, any type of information that you need to manage. And what I'm going to talk about is what is hybrid ECM. And then what I'm going to talk about is give you a little scenario about how it could be used to help a financial services company manage its processes, allow it to collaborate with people outside of the organization, and again, manage that content securely and allowing IT to regain control. So first off, what is hybrid ECM? And hybrid ECM is a new concept that we're seeing a lot of interest from companies and a lot of interest from the analyst community. They recognize that this is the way that companies are going to want systems to work over the next few years, rather than just having private installs on-premise or in their private data centers. What they want is to have the benefit of both. So they'll have a private install where they'll have a solution based in their office, but they also then want to link that with a public cloud environment so that they get the benefits of the cloud. The private install, they can integrate it with other line of business applications, they can configure it, they can control it, they can manage most of the content that they need to manage to run their business. But then they also can then use the cloud to actually share that content that they need to share with their business partners, with their clients, with their customers, and allow them to get the benefits of the cloud, the ubiquitous access to the cloud in a secure way. Hopefully this diagram explains a little bit more what I mean. At the bottom half of the diagram, you've got what happens in the office. So I've got an ECM solution in place. We use it to manage our business documents, huge number of files that we collaborate on inside the organization. But there are people that I need to work with outside. There may be clients, legal counsel, external consultants, etc. And what I really want to be able to do is say, this piece of content I need to share with somebody. And I can synchronize that content out to a secure network within the cloud and then invite those business partners in and allow them to work on that. They can update the content. If they update it, those changes are synchronized back on premise so that I have a record of those within my internal systems. If I change the documents internally, again, those changes are synchronized out, so now my business partner gets to see those. So in essence, that's really what is hybrid ECM. Now, one of the things that I wanted to look at today is mobile devices and how you get access to this content on your mobile devices. So I've got a little poll question, and I want to ask is, if you have a tablet device, an iPad, an Android tablet, or if you're using a mobile phone, one of the smartphones, and you're trying to use those for business, what are the problems you see of using that for business? So could it be accessing business content? Again, you're outside the office, you're in a coffee shop. How do you get access to the latest document, the latest piece of information that you need to be able to do your job? Is it accessing corporate networks? Is VPN an issue? Is that a problem? Are you worried about security of data? If you lose that mobile device, what happens to that data when somebody picks it up? Is it a lack of business applications? David explained that lots of problems with business applications not being designed to be able to run on the form factor of some of these mobile devices. Or is it the case that you can't actually integrate your business process? That when you're outside the office working on those devices, there's no way to initiate a business process or take part in an existing business process within there. So hopefully we run the poll. And there's a good spread there. We've got a third of the people are saying that they can't access business content on those mobile devices. Accessing corporate networks, again, 30% of people are having a problem with there. A lot of people worried about the security. And we see this a lot from talking to customers, talking to companies, is they're really worried about if I do use a tablet device and I've got corporate information, what happens if that device is lost? Lack of business apps, again, a big issue. And again, the business process. Not so many people, 22% there looking at that. Well, what I'd like to look now is how hybrid ECM actually addresses a lot of those concerns. So how can hybrid ECM help a financial services company? And for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to look at two areas. One area is mobile enablement. David talked about the new way of working, where we have lots of employees out working from remote locations, not in the office, needing to get access to corporate content and to be able to do their jobs. And also the need to work and work with your business partners and do this external collaboration. Up until now, I think a lot of external collaboration has been done via email, where you send a document out, they return it, you then have to manage any updates to that and then send it back out again, which is a very problematic and slow process. So what we're going to look at is how hybrid ECM can address both of those. And for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to look at the mortgage application process. So I've got Brian, a fictitious character, who's an independent financial advisor, and he's going out and he's working with clients, understanding what their financial needs are, and as part of his job, he has a number of different products that he can sell them. So he can sell them a loan, possibly they need to finance purchasing a car or purchasing something for the home. It could be a mortgage that I need to actually buy the house itself, and again, he will work out a good deal for you. It could be investments. I've got some money that I need to invest. It could be pensions. I'm saving up for retirement, and I want to work with Brian to understand the best options for me as a person, how much I should invest, and work on that. It could be other savings schemes like ISAs, or it could be insurance policies that he's selling. But for each of these products, there's a whole range of information that Brian needs to have to hand so that he can talk intelligently about each of those different products. Whether it be project brochures that he wants to give out to the client, whether it's presentations that talk about the options of different mortgages and the benefits of a repayment mortgage over an endowment mortgage over a flat rate mortgage, whatever it happens to be. It could be that if I'm doing investments, there are different fund reviews and I need to explain to the client the benefits of high risk investments over safe investments and the different the returns on investment that we can expect. Of course, when he's signing up the applicant, there is application forms that need to be completed so that you can process the application. There may be market information that he needs to give and key facts documents, a whole range of information. So there's this bundle of information that typically he keeps in the boot of his car. And when somebody says, oh yeah, I'm interested in this pension deal, he will then go out there and pull out the relevant information. But what Brian really wants to be able to do is keep all of that latest information, not outdated information that's been printed, but all that information on his tablet device. So he can actually open up his tablet and he can very intimately just walk the customer through the different options for the mortgages, or different options for the pension schemes. And he's got the latest information on there, on the rates, the interest rates, the returns expected, based on the documents that he's getting. But the problem is, he's outside of that firewall. He's working external to the organisation. So typically, your IT have put a firewall in there, and they've put the firewall in there for a really good reason. The reason is to protect all those corporate assets. I don't want people getting into my internal systems and getting access. And David talked about some of the cases where there have been breaches of security and that data has been has lost. So from his mobile device, yes, he can access that when he's in the office, but when he's out with the client and he realizes that something's been updated, he can't VPN in and get access to that corporate information. So what does he do? Well, he resorts to a number of tried and tested means. So he may use email. So he'll email the documents to himself so he can download it and keep a copy of that document on his tablet device. It could be that he's been in the office and somebody's, oh, that's a great presentation, and gives him a copy on a USB drive, and he keeps that in his bag for when he needs it. Or it could be that he works with one of those consumer file sharing sites that David outlined. Things like Dropbox, things like iCloud, the Google Drives of this world. Now, I'm not knocking those services, and I use those for my personal files, but they're not intended for enterprises to share and collaborate. And they're very much a consumer environment. And again, when we start seeing people putting information out there, what you end up with is what we call information silos, where Brian may have gone and opened up a Dropbox folder and he's shared some client information there with that client. And he's emailed something else to somebody else, and he's got it on various different USB drives. But the problem is all of that content is now separate, and it exposes a huge risk to the organizations, to the companies, because that information very quickly becomes out of date. And now I've got my partners working with out-of-date information. And again, that has a risk, and there could be a knock-on effect of that. And this slide really looks at a lot of the issues that we see companies coming to us and saying, where is the final version of that proposal? Is it on the S drive? Is it on the USB stick? Is it on a Dropbox folder? When I'm emailing content, possibly I fill in the first three letters of somebody's name, and my email app is very helpful and completes the email address for me. But I don't check it, and instead of sending it to Paul Hampton, I send it to somebody else, Paul Home Higgins. So I've actually sent the wrong proposal or the wrong document to the wrong person. So huge problems with these information silos from a compliance point of view, where I've got uncontrolled information, but also from a process point of view where I don't really know where the latest version and where all that content is being stored. And I think that hybrid ECM solutions solves this problem. So now if we go back to this analogy, now I've got my on-premise for managing all of my content, and then I can say, actually, I know my field workers need this information. So I can select that information and I can synchronize it out to a secure network. A secure network in the cloud that allows them to get access to that. So now when they're talking to the client and the client says, oh, what is the latest on the pensions, or what's the latest on the mortgage rates, Brian can just very quickly from his iPad go into the site and say, well, here's the latest reports that I've got on how well our funds are doing, or how the mortgage rates are going. But this is only the start. Not only now can I can publish that information out to the secure network and allow Brian access, but Brian can now start business processes directly from this cloud. So he's with the client says, yes, I want to take out a mortgage application. Brian can now pick up a form on his iPad. He can complete all the details for the client on that, potentially get the client to sign it, and then publish that back into this cloud site. And that cloud site, this secure network, then synchronizes that content back on-premise. And what happens then is you start the approval process. So now I don't have to wait for Brian to get back to his home office or come to the office to actually upload lots of paper documents or fill in forms there. He can do that directly while he's at the client. That application form comes back onto premise. We automatically pick that up and then start the required business process, the workflow that's going to process that completed application form through the approval review cycle until its end. But it could be when Brian's on site with the client and they need some supporting documentation. I need proof of identity. I want to see the passport to say that we've got that. I need some proof of earnings, so I need to get copies of the last two pay slips from the client. Or it could be that I need details of the property. Now, Brian can now scan those in. He can take photographs of those documents with his mobile phone and, again, upload those images through the cloud site, posting those to the client's folder. Again, those files are now synchronized back down. And those documents go into that business process. And now the person that's dealing with this back in the office can now see I've got the completed application form and I've got the supporting document needed. So I can see, yes, I've got proof of identity. I've got a copy of the passport. I can see the earnings because I've got copies of the pay slips and I've got details of the property. But it could be as part of this process, later on in the application process, I need more information from the client. Now, what I can now open up is that secure network to the client. And I can have the client log in and say, well, here's my folder, here's all the documents that we've got associated with your loan application. Now, could you put in a copy of the property survey, evaluation of the property? I need that information before we're going to give you that loan. So the client can now start posting that information. They don't now have to send in paper copies. They don't have to email those documents. They can post those themselves, and that, again, through the sync mechanism, flows back in. So I now have a folder with all the content, all the information necessary to manage all of the loan application. And I can now make an informed decision about, yes, I can see that, yes, the client can pay for the mortgage, yes, the property is worth the money we're going to lend them, and then I can approve that or reject it depending on what those circumstances are. But this hybrid approach can go beyond that. It allows you to go out and actually work with other business partners. So think of this for mergers and acquisitions, where I need to work with a client. They're looking at acquiring a company. They've asked the bank to do some due diligence and investigation. Well, I may need to go out to some legal counsel. I may need external consultants. I may need some research analysts to provide me with research papers. Well, again, I can work within the secure network in the cloud, making sure that all that content is synchronized back. It could be sales. I'm doing swaps and derivatives trading, and again, I may want to share research information with my key clients. I can open a site in the cloud. I can give that client, a high esteemed client, access to that information within that cloud, and I can put in there the research information that I want them to get access to, and again, I can offer that as an extra service to those clients. So we believe that a hybrid approach, taking the benefits of an on-premise installation where you have all the benefits of the security, the benefits of the integration capability, the benefits of the configuration that you need to allow you to manage that. And combining that with this hybrid approach where you start leveraging this capability within the cloud, and now you can start sharing and managing and collaborating through this cloud in a secure way, and now making it easier for your internal employees to work. So they don't have to go start looking at ways around IT, so looking at using some of these consumer tools. The IT are now giving them what they want. They're giving them the tools necessary to collaborate with their clients, collaborate with their business partners, keeping that content in control. And IT get what it wants. It now has control. It has full control of its secure network in the cloud, and it has full control of all of that content kept on premise. So we believe that this hybrid approach removes many of the barriers that we're seeing companies faced while actually getting business done in today's working environment. We're now going to pause for questions. While we're taking those questions, I'm going to leave this slide up on the screen. David alluded to a white paper. A lot of what we've talked about today has been put into a white paper. We sponsored this, but it's independent research by AIM and bobsguide, and again, that's free for you to download, and we'll let you guys know when that guide is being published. So I would now like to hand back over to Ian to see if we've got any questions.
Great, thank you, Paul, and thank also to David there for your presentations today. As Paul said, we're now going to start the Q&A session. So if you do have any questions for our panelists, then please type those into the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen. Please remember, if you can send it to all panelists, then we can all see it and we'll be able to answer those questions. So to move on to our first question, somebody has asked us, what about security in the cloud?
That's a very good question. We get asked a lot about putting information into cloud environment and what are the security mechanisms in place. We use, for the Alfresco solution, we use the underlying Amazon services, and we use encryption. So any content that you put into the cloud is encrypted while it's saved to the Amazon servers. And on top of that, then we have a layer that allows you to have a secure network. So you will have a network based on your domain. You will grant access to that to various people. It could be clients, it could be business partners, and they only get to see the information that you want them to see. And again, that information is encrypted so that only when it's decrypted can they get access to it. So all of that happens seamlessly within the cloud solution.
I think I'd also like to jump in on the end of that, Paul. One of the sort of conceptual dilemmas that people have, I think, dealing with the cloud is that a lot of people seem to think that they have to put all of their information in the cloud or none of it. And I think one of the benefits of the hybrid approach is that you aren't even suggesting putting all of your information in the cloud. You're putting selective pockets. And I think every organization has got content that has varying levels of security requirements, ranging from sort of marketing literature, which anybody can see, and in fact you want anybody to see, down through sort of contractual details, down to sort of share sensitive and highly confidential information. What you can do with a hybrid system is determine which of those types of content you want put online or made available through the hybrid system. But you know, we're certainly not suggesting that you would put highly confidential information onto let's say a public cloud, for example.
That's a very good point. As you say, this gives you the option to choose what you share and how you share it, and what, more importantly, you don't share.
Absolutely, and I think just to sort of finalize that thing, if a lot of people think that their information is more secure on their servers than on a cloud server, I would encourage anybody to go and take a look at some of the data centers around the country, and then come up with the argument that the data is actually more secure on their servers than in some of these highly secure facilities.
It was interesting. I was at an analyst event, and they were talking about cloud and security of the cloud, and one of the panelists gave quite a nice indication of this. He was a CIO, and the CEO was saying about cloud. He didn't trust cloud, and they happened to be talking outside of the data center. And at that time, the door opened, and this gentleman came out of the data center, and the CIO said to the CEO, he said, "Do you know who that person is?" And the CEO said no, and the CIO said, "I don't know who he is, but he's just been inside our data center." And I think that brought home that there is these cloud data centers are run extremely securely, and often more securely than possibly your on-premise data center.
Absolutely. Just to sort of wrap that one up as well, that there was an interesting sort of ethical consideration thrown at me a couple of weeks ago with respect to this. Your cloud content provider or your cloud hybrid ECM provider has got absolutely no interest in your data and in the contents of your data. They do it for 50, 100, 1,000 clients. The IT department, who are storing and managing all of your data, which might include salary details of all of the employees, they have got a reason to be interested in that data. So where is your data more secure?
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. I've just seen there's another question that came in about how secure is the cloud, but they then go on to say, how is this set up? Is it by themselves, or does the cloud company set this up?
So in this particular case, the on-premise solution is managed by your IT department, so they would install that and they would configure that, and they would run it and manage that. The cloud piece is a single multi-tenant environment that is managed as a service by Alfresco. And you can try it for free. If you go to our website, you'll see that there's a sign-up page. You can log in. The only thing you need is a business email address, and we then use your domain name to create a secure network within that cloud, and you can then start inviting other people in and collaborating with those. So that piece is managed by us. We have an ops team that manage that on top of the Amazon. So Amazon manages the core infrastructure, and then we manage the application on top of that. From a synchronization point of view, depending on the user, you can give users the ability to synchronize content, and they can then say, I'm working with a business partner, I want to share some information. They can select that information and then just say synchronize to the cloud. It will ask them where they want to synchronize it within your secure network, which area do they want to synchronize that to, and it will then build that synchronization. More importantly, at the end of the process, you can say, I actually now want to unsynchronize that, and it will remove it from the cloud, so now that the only copy is stored on your on-premise servers. But again, for the life of that project, you can now then work quite easily with your business partners.
I think an interesting thing there, Paul, as well, is that process that you've just described by no means is complicated. It's no easier than doing the same sort of thing via Dropbox or SkyDrive or whatever. But I think the big benefit to an organisation is that it's been done in a controlled manner. It's been done in a manner that's auditable, and is being done on secure services and servers and systems, and that does leave that audit trail behind it.
Exactly right. I mean, the problem you have, I would even say it's easier than Dropbox, because if I've got the content already inside my ECM solution, to put it into Dropbox, I've got to take it out. I've then got to put it into a Dropbox folder, share that folder, and then send a link to the client. This approach, the content never leaves your ECM. You just say, I want to synchronize it, and you do it directly from the interface, and out it goes, and it synchronizes. And you get the benefit that if it changes over time, if the business partner, if you're reviewing a legal contract, and you've got an external legal counsel that are making modifications, you have all that version history, so you know who changed it and when they changed it, and you're managing that in the cloud environment, and all those changes are synchronized back on premise. You lose that as soon as you go to email. You lose that as soon as you go to something like a Dropbox. You don't have that compliance. You don't have that ability to go back and see that audit trail of who changed what and when.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul, there. So the next question we have here is someone's asking, if they use this approach for their work with their clients, do they need to buy a license for each of their clients or business partners?
In the Alfresco world, no. We are an open source company, so we don't sell licenses as such. We sell a support subscription. And you pay a support subscription for the piece that you install on premise. You also pay a support subscription for any of your named users within the organization that are using the cloud piece. But anybody that you invite into your secure network, so all those business partners, are actually free. And the reason we've done that is it gets very hard to justify having to buy a license for each of those business partners, who some of them you may only work with once a year, possibly at the end of financial year they do an audit and you want to share some information with those, so they're intensive for a 2-week period of the year, but the rest of the time they're not using it. So all of those business users that you invite in, all those clients, prospects, people you're working with, they share your network, but you don't have to pay for those. You only pay for the people within your organization that are using that network.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. It's another question on security. Somebody's asking, if they were to lose their tablet device, is there a security risk with this?
Another good question. So we have a dedicated Alfresco app that works on iOS devices, so iPad, iPhone, and it also works on Android devices, so it could be an Android tablet or an Android phone. That application, when I access the content, I can either access it directly online, so I can browse and find information, and that works fine when I'm connected to a network. So I could be in a coffee shop using their network to access my network in the cloud. But I can also synchronize that content. There could be key information, key presentations, key pricing information that I always want to have current. So I can say that's a favorite, and what will happen is that app will always synchronize the latest version down to my device. But again, we use encryption. So we encrypt that content on the device. So if I should lose a device, unless somebody's got my security credentials, so they've got my ID and my password, then they're never going to be able to decrypt that content that's stored on that device. So most likely they're going to wipe that device as opposed to trying to hack in, because they're not going to break the decryption algorithms that we've used. So even though the content's stored on the device, again, it's stored securely, so that if you lose your device, then people aren't going to be able to access that information.
Right. Thanks, Paul. The next question here, it's like someone needs to convince their boss, and they're saying their bosses don't want to go to the cloud, but they themselves can see the benefits of this. So can you suggest any way to help them?
David, do you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess, again, it sort of comes back down to this idea that a lot of people think that the cloud is an all-or-nothing situation or project. And what we're finding certainly is that a lot of organizations are trialing or piloting cloud installations at sort of almost a department level. So if a specific department or a specific team have got a requirement to share documentation and to collaborate on documentation outside of the firewall, then it's very easy to set up a cloud environment to do that. What that will do is, obviously, by trialing that, you start to see the benefits, that team will start to see the benefits, and it's a very sort of limited scope test to see whether it works, to see what sort of impact it has on the rest of the business, and to see what sort of productivity benefits you get from it. What it also does is it proves the technology. So if the technology works for that one team, you can very easily roll it out to another team, to another team, to another team. And I think that's one of the beauties of the cloud from a business perspective, is that you can sort of up your capacity without any changes. It's not like in the past where if you needed more horsepower, you needed to buy more servers. With the cloud, you literally say, I'd like more licenses, and it's down to the likes of Alfresco and Amazon to sort that out behind the scenes. So I think that's certainly breaking things down, doing pilot projects, working at a departmental or a project level is one of the ways to get things moving and to persuade reluctant bosses, if you like, that the cloud can actually work for them.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'd like to add that I think over the next 10 years or 5 years, we're going to see a lot of companies moving. As they become more confident with the cloud, we're going to see a lot of those applications moving to the cloud. I think it's analogous to online shopping. When that first came out, people were very wary about buying goods online, worried about their credit cards details being stolen, worried about whether the vendor was going to serve them the goods. Move on a few years, everybody's comfortable now with online purchasing and buying goods from Amazon and similar services. And I think you're going to see the same thing happening with the cloud. People are going to get more and more confident with the cloud, and are going to move more and more of their business applications to the cloud because of the benefits that David's outlined. But I think this hybrid approach is a nice step to getting there, so that you don't have to do everything at a big bang. You can say, well, actually, let's use a hybrid approach and move some of our business processing out into a cloud environment, get some of the benefits of that, and as you get more confident, then you're going to move more and more of your processing over there. We do have customers that have gone solely for a cloud environment, and they don't use the on-premise piece at all. They just use everything in the cloud.
I think what's interesting there as well, Paul, is that we might see a shift in some of the sort of vendor portfolios that organizations have. Certainly, if you like, the crowdsourcing aspect of cloud technologies, and the fact that users can literally sign up very, very quickly for a cloud tool and start using it without the go-ahead from the IT department. I think if a lot of vendors aren't careful and don't start providing cloud solutions to legacy systems, for example, then people will literally just jump ship, because it's much, much easier to do that now than it ever has been.
It's a very good point. As you say, people can self-select the systems they use, and IT will lose control.
Great, thanks guys. I'm just going to go to one about the amount of time it takes. There's someone saying that security is clearly a big issue, but what always seems to take time is assigning rights to different users and user groups. It's time-consuming and complex to operate.
Is it difficult? We have the concept of roles, so you give somebody a role within the site. So the way that we manage security, so in the cloud environment, I have a secure network, and that's based on your domain, and only your internal users that log in with that domain name will get to see all of the content, all of the content that they're given access to. If I invite a business partner into that network, then I create a separate site, and they only get access to the content that I want them to see that I've shared with them within that site. Then within that, I can then define what their role is, and I can then say that they are only a consumer, in which case they can read content but they can't change it, or I can say that they're a collaborator, and there are various steps between those two. So rather than having to go through and dictate on each individual item, you can use the roles to actually allocate that security to multiple people and multiple pieces of content that you want them to get access to.
I think also the beauty with respect to a hybrid solution as well, Paul, is that it's not an additional system. It's being built on an ECM system that is already there, that's already operational, that's working in an on-premise situation. So, opening content out through the hybrid network, if you like, is literally a natural extension to what's already been set up and already been created and already working.
Yeah, so that's a good point. In the Alfresco case, the application that you're running in the cloud is exactly the same application that you're running on-premise. So your users are familiar to running with Alfresco on-premise, they're managing their documents, they're used to the user interface, they have exactly the same look and feel, exactly the same capability in the cloud, so there's no relearning. It is the same application, it's just deployed in two different locations.
Great, thanks guys. So next question we have here, does this work with all workflow applications? And could they also link it to their website for their clients?
Two questions there. So with regard to workflow, the Alfresco system comes bundled with two workflow tools, two business process tools. We have JBPM and we also have Activity, and both of those allow you to configure workflows, configure business processes, and they can then be automatically started when an event happens. So in the case I used here, when a new loan application document gets dropped into a folder, you can then select to start one of those workflows. But we, as part of an open source company, we're a very open company. So if you already have an existing BPM tool in-house that you want to use, then it should be relatively easy to use some level of integration to allow us to communicate with that BP engine and then assign documents to it and manage that. And we have customers that have done that, where they want to, they have a business process which goes outside of the content management, that integrates with other line of business applications, and therefore they want to use a tool that does that. So that potentially is possible depending on what that other third-party tool is. We normally find that that would be sometimes there's a restriction as to how open those other tools are. Can I link it to my website for my clients? You can. One of the things that we have within the Alfresco, you can publish content directly from Alfresco out to various websites. You can do that from internal systems. So we do that for our website. So a lot of the content is managed inside Alfresco, but we use a Drupal to build a front end for our web, and we publish that content out through a Drupal front end to our website. So again, that's an option. In the cloud, you also have the option to do what we call a public link. So I can find a document, and I don't want to invite a client in, but I want to share something that's stored in that cloud with them, and I can then say, share this, and it'll give me a public link, and then I can then email that link to that document, or I can Skype it to somebody, or I can send it to them some way, and they can then see and review that document. They can't download it, but they can read it online, and there's an inbuilt viewer that allows them to look at that content. So there are multiple ways of sharing it without actually inviting that client or that business partner into the cloud site. Again, there are other tools of doing that. Or if you want to back-end your website with Alfresco, then again, you can do that with the on-premise piece.
Okay.
Paul, I think just before we move on, I'd like to sort of reinforce how important workflow is within a hybrid system, because certainly workflow isn't something that you get as part of the, if you like, the consumer online file shares or consumer cloud file shares. And even if you do get a workflow capability within a completely cloud-based file share solution, actually hooking that back into any existing workflows that you've got on-premise can be very, very difficult from experience. So having a hybrid system which has got a seamless and consistent workflow system that works on-premise and in the cloud, I think is a very, very powerful selling point and a very powerful thing for users to make use of.
Great. So thanks, guys. So just one last question, and it's quite a good one to finish on. One of our attendees say that they still don't trust any cloud provider enough to put imported data with them. So what can you do to alleviate those fears?
I think David outlined it earlier on, where he said this hybrid approach actually gives you the choice of what information you store where. So that for 80% of my content, I don't need to collaborate with other people outside the organization. I'm going to keep that 80% on-premise in my internal systems because I'm happy with it being stored there. But 20% of my content, I need to collaborate. Now, whether I put that into a cloud and I trust that cloud vendor to do that collaboration, or what am I going to do? I'm going to email it to somebody, or I'm going to find some other way of getting that content. Well, if I email it, there's a good chance that those email systems are hosted in some cloud application anyway. So you're now putting that content out into a cloud environment, but you're losing control of it because it's outside of your control in email. With this hybrid approach, I think you get the best of both worlds. You can define what content you don't want to share externally. You can also then say, the content I do want to share externally, I really want to regain control of that, and therefore I'm going to put it into my secure network in the cloud. I think it was one of the poll questions. I think there was over 60% of the people that were online today were saying that they were using Dropbox for business content. Well, that's in a cloud environment, and you're already using that, but you've lost control. IT have lost control of that content. So using a hybrid approach allows you to regain that level of control.
I think just to add to that, Paul, there's also an element of common sense that needs to come in with respect to people saying that they don't necessarily trust the security of cloud providers. With respect, if you think about internal content that is secure, that's got high business value, not everyone within the business will have access to that. So in order to be able to see that, to work with that within the business, you're going to need to be of a particular level within that business. And associated with that level in the business is a level of trust. Now, just because that person within the organization chooses to share that. They will, that it's no different to sharing that information within the business from my perspective. There is a level of trust that is accumulated as you go through the layers of any corporate structure, and it's not as if an office junior will be able to publish highly sensitive content to the cloud, because they simply won't have access to it. It will have to be a high-level senior management person that makes the decision to publish that to the cloud or to share it to the cloud, and they will only do it, as you say, when they need to. So I think it's just dropping a common sense argument back into that as well.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully you've been able to alleviate that person's fears. So now, sadly, we're out of time today on today's webinar. So I'd like to say one final thanks to both Paul and David for their contribution today, and also to say a final thanks to Alfresco for their sponsorship of today's webinar. Just one final reminder that a recording of this webinar will be available on bobsguide shortly, and you will receive an email with details of this. So that just leaves me to say thank you all for attending today, and we look forward to welcoming you to another bobsguide webinar in the near future. Many thanks and goodbye.